Hello students, today we are going to discuss about residential status, block 2, unit 4 of your curriculum. So before going into the in-depth analysis of what is residential status, let us clear the myths which are existing in our mindsets. See, we all think that residential status, we are residents of India by birth, isn't it? Yes, of course, 99% we think that by birth, by geographical restrictions, we are native of India. But as our syllabus is an income tax syllabus, according to income tax department, residential status does not come by birth. It has certain different criteria on which basis residential status of an individual is decided or determined. So, let us now know what is residential status, how it is determined and who are the different persons comes under the residential status. So, now let us move to the next one. First we discuss about introduction. So, if you look at here, introduction, we have 3 points. The first one is residential status. So, residential status of any individual or any person is determined under section 6 of the Income Tax Act 1961. So, how it is determined? Residential status of an individual is determined as per the section 6 of the Income Tax Act 1961. Then, is it going to be the same residential status for everyone? No. Then how it is going to change? Let us see. If you look at here, we have incidence of tax. Incidence of tax varies from one individual to the other based on the residential status. So, if two persons are there, A and B, it is not mandatory that A will be paying the same tax amount or B will be paying the tax amount. Why? Because they cannot pay until the residential status is determined. Normally, we all think that whoever earns has to pay the tax. No, it's not like that. They has to be determined whether they are resident or not. Then only they are called as assessee and then they are liable to pay the tax. And assessee may be correctly assessed by tax only when their residential status is determined. So, if it is not determined, we cannot claim he is an assessee and he cannot pay the tax. So, let us see who are the different persons and what are the types of residential status. If you look at this picture or the image which is visible to you all is, we have person. According to definition of person, person means an individual, and HUF, that is Hindu undivided family, or partnership firm, company, association of persons or artificial judicial persons. These all comes under the person. When you are talking and trying to determine the residential status of individual, and HUF will remain as it is, but whereas the other persons it is going to vary. If you can look at the image what is displaying here, individual and HUFs are determined under 3 types. The first one is ordinary resident, the next one is not ordinary resident, and the third one is non-resident. What do we call as NRIs, non-resident of India. So, it does not mean that whoever stays in abroad or whoever stays in foreign are non-resident. Maybe geographically they are non-resident, but according to income tax department it is not like that. Then how it is? You may be getting it out in your mind that ma'am is telling that by geographical or by birth we are not Indians, we are not, maybe you are Indians, but ma'am is telling that we are not the residents. Then how we have to going to determine? So, now let us check what are the conditions which will make us to know that yes, this person is a resident, or yes, this person is resident but not ordinary resident, or he is non-resident. We have certain conditions, we have certain rules, based on that the residential status will be determined. And if you look at on the other side where it is showing firm, company or partnership firm or other artificial person, there we have only two status, that is pretty clear, that is resident and non-resident. So, now let us look, first we will discuss about individual. Okay. So, let us see what actually individual says. If you look at this picture, something is denoting that, yes, the same chart diagram, it has been denoting here individual and HUFs. We have three things, that is resident and ordinary resident, resident but not ordinarily resident and non-resident. To call these three different residential status, we have certain rules. Apart from this, even you can look at here firm, company, there we have only two status, that is resident and non-resident. So, now look at the individual perspective. So, residential status of an assessee is to be determined every previous year. Means, for example, as we all know that we pay the tax for the income what we have earned in the last year, that is previous year. In the current year we will be paying. The current year we call it as assessment year, and the year in which we earned income we call it as previous year. So, every time the residential status of an assessee is taken based on the previous year. So, it is nowhere related to the current or assessment year. This point has to be kept in your mind. Next one, residential status in the assessment year is immaterial for tax purpose. So, whenever taxpayer is called what? An assessee. Assessee is the person who pays the tax to the income tax department. So, whenever you are determining the residential status, during that period, we will not take the assessment year residential status. Assessment year residential status is nowhere we are going to taking into consideration. So, we have to consider the residential status only of the previous year. Previous year means 12 months preceding to the assessment year. Okay. For example, if the assessment year is 2022 and 23, so what would be our previous year? Our previous year will be 21 and 22. So, all the time our previous year residential status only will be taken into consideration, and assessment year residential status will not be considered. Now, if you look at here, residential status of an assessee may differ from year to year because on the burden of proof is the burden of assessee only. Why? Because it is the responsibility of the, or it is a duty of the assessee to prove that he or she is the resident. That is their own burden, they have to bear it. Now, just look at here, individuals. So, individuals residential status is determined according to section 6 and subsection 1. So, individual may be three types as we have discussed, that is ordinary resident, not ordinary resident and non-resident. Then residence means what? If just look at here, normally we think it is a territorial or geographical connections, but it is not like that when you take it to income tax department consideration. So, then how we are going to determine? We have two conditions. What are those? Two conditions. The foremost condition is, we call it as basic condition, and the other conditions we call it as additional conditions. So, these conditions are also called as test. You can look it on the screen. Here we have test or conditions. Means every assessee or every individual person who is liable to pay tax has to fulfill these conditions. Let's see what are those conditions. Look at here. We have first one is basic conditions, that is section 6 and subsection 1, and the second one. So, what are the conditions under basic conditions? I said we have basic conditions and additional conditions. So, under basic conditions we have two types of conditions. What are they? Let us see. Every person or an SSE must and should stay 182 days in the previous year. So, how many days the SSE must stay? A stay of a period or a periods amounting in all to 182 days or more. So, minimum 182 days or more they have to be reside in the India in the previous year. So, this is the first foremost basic condition. So, if you want to claim you are a resident of India, you have to stay how many days in India? You have to stay 182 days. In which year? In the previous year. Now, let us see the second basic condition. So, what is the second basic condition? Stay in India for a period or periods amounting in all to 60 days or more. So, if for example, if any individual is unable to stay for 182 days, then he is not resident, because we have two basic conditions. What I said, the first basic condition is they must stay 182 days, or it is not and, or it means an individual may fulfill any one basic condition, it is enough. An individual must and should fulfill at least one basic condition, either 182 days or more in the previous year, or 60 days in the last year, that is previous year, and 365 days out of 4 relevant preceding previous years. So, what is the rules? We have two basic conditions. The first basic condition is the individual or the SSE must stay 60 days and 365 days out of 4 relevant preceding previous years. Means, for example, if our assessment year is 22 and 23, so what will be our 4 preceding previous years? 21-22, 20-21, 19-20, 18-19. So, like this back we have to go. 4 preceding previous years. In that 4 years, the SSE must have stayed 365 days and 60 days in the previous years. So, this is the foremost basic condition every student must and should remember. Why? Because based on this only the individual will be decided whether he is a resident or not. Out of these two conditions, if one condition is satisfied, it is enough for us. It is not mandatory that they have to satisfy both the conditions. Only one condition is satisfied. So, now let us move to the additional conditions. And apart from that, normally what I said, in the previous year, you should satisfy at least one condition, either 182 days or 60 and 365. But there are certain situations where there are two cases. It is not mandatory that they have to stay for 60 days. So, look at the first one, where an Indian citizen or a foreign national of Indian origin who is settled outside India comes on a visit, means who has settled in, actually is an Indian only, but who has settled in foreign, and he comes to India only for a visit. Okay. In that case, we will take 60 days only. We will not go for the first most basic condition. Why? Because the second basic condition was like this. What was that? 60 days and 365 days out of 4 relevant preceding years. But when he is coming for the first time, in that case only that too for visit. Okay. In that situation, we take, instead of 180 days, we go for only 60 days. If the resident is staying only for 60 days, he will be considered as resident of India. Now, look at the second case, where an Indian citizen who leaves India in any previous year for the purpose of employment or as a member of the crew of Indian ship outside India, the period of 60 days has been extended to 182 days. Means whoever is working in cruise, ships, yes, who are on employment, in that case the 60 days rule will not be taken into consideration. Why? Because in 60 days what is there? Along with 60 days, they should have stayed 365 days, which is not at all possible for them. So, in that case that will be removed, only 182 days will be taken into consideration. So, these are the basic conditions. Now, look at the additional conditions. Additional conditions according to section 6 and subsection 6, it has been discussed. So, again additional conditions also we have two additional conditions. Okay. Look at the first one. The individual is a resident of India at least 2 years out of 10 previous preceding years. So, what is the first additional conditions? The individual must have stayed in India. How many years? 2 years. Out of how many years? 10 years. That too relevant to our preceding previous years. This is the first additional condition. Now, let us look at the second additional condition. The individual must have stayed in India for a period of 730 days or more during 7 previous years. So, what is the first one additional condition? 2 years out of 10 years and 730 days. How many days? 730 days out of 7 years. So, it is not like basic conditions that only one should be satisfied. No, my dear students. Under additional conditions, they have to fulfill both the conditions. For example, X is an individual, he satisfying two basic conditions, but is not satisfying any additional conditions. In that case, he will be called as resident but not ordinarily resident. What will they be called? Resident but not ordinarily resident, means they are satisfying only basic conditions and not satisfying any additional conditions. For example, otherwise in another case, he is satisfying one basic condition and satisfying only one additional condition. In that case also, the individual will be called as resident but not ordinarily resident. The third situation, he is satisfying both additional conditions and both basic conditions. Then the individual will be called as resident but ordinarily resident. Satisfying both additional conditions as well basic conditions. In that case, they will be called as resident but ordinarily resident. Let us look at that. It is there in another slide. Just you can have a glance over that. See, you can look at here, resident and ordinarily resident, resident but not ordinarily resident and non-resident. So, let us understand, when do we call the individuals as resident and ordinary resident, and when do we call resident but not ordinary resident and non-resident? It is very simple. You should first understand the basic conditions and additional conditions. So, if the individual is satisfying both basic and both additional conditions, the individual will be called as the first point, that is resident and ordinarily resident. You may get it out, ma'am, if the individual is not satisfying, only satisfying one basic condition, then he is not, then also he will be called as resident and ordinary resident, because basic condition only one is enough, but additional conditions they have to satisfy two additional conditions. For example, if resident is satisfying both basic conditions but satisfying only one additional condition, in that case they will be called as the second one, that is resident but not ordinarily resident. You may get it out, ma'am, okay. If he is satisfying only one basic condition and one additional condition, then what is its treatment? In that case also, why? Because I said earlier, what I said? They have to satisfy both additional conditions. Then only he will be called as the first thing, that is resident and ordinarily resident. If he is satisfying both basic also, but if he is not satisfying both additional conditions, in that case they will be called as resident but not ordinarily resident. Then who are non-resident? It is very simple. They are neither satisfying basic conditions nor satisfying additional conditions. They come under the non-resident. I hope it is very clear to you all. Yes. So, let us look at one problem related how do we determine the residential status. Just look at the question once. Mr. X left India for the first time on June 18, 2018. During the financial year 2020-21, he came to India once in September 2020 for a period of 45 days. Determine his residential status for the assessment year. So, what I said, first what we have to look after? We have to look after basic condition. What is basic condition? 182 days in the previous year. What is our assessment year? If you look at here, it is showing 2021 and 22. So, what will be our previous year? 2020 to 21. That is 1st April 2020 to 31st March 2021. In this period, whether he is there in India for 182 days or not, let us check it. When he is coming? He came in September 20. And how many days he was there? He was there only for 45 days. He is there only for 45 days. How many days he should be? He should be for 180. Is he satisfying the first basic condition? No. Here itself he has gone wrong. Why? Because he has to say for 182 days in the previous year. Is not satisfying the first basic condition. Now look at the next one. What is second additional basic condition? 60 days or more and 365 days out of the 4 preceding previous years. Okay. Just look at here, how many days does he stayed for 60 days? No, he stayed only for 45 days. So, he is not even satisfying the second basic condition. So, what he is? He is neither resident nor resident but not ordinary. He does not come under. He is non-resident. So, just look at the solution once. As Mr. X stays in India for maximum period of 45 days only during the previous year 2021. He does not satisfy any of the basic conditions. So, he is therefore what he is? He is, yes, you are absolutely right, he is non-resident of India for the assessment year 2021 and 22. Is it clear? Yes. So, now look at the next one more problem, let us understand very clearly. Mr. A comes to India for the first time on April 1, 2018. During his stay in India up to October 5, 2020. He stays at Delhi up to April 10, 2020 and thereafter in Chennai till his departure from India. Determine his residential status for the assessment year 2021-22. So, what is our previous year? As soon as you read the assessment year, you should come, previous year should hit your mind. What is our previous year? 2022, that is 1st April 2022, 31st March 2021. So, in this period we have to look after whether he stayed for how many days or not. So, when he is coming to India? He came to India on April 1, 2018. Till when he was in India? During his stay in India up to October 5, 2020. So, from 2018 to October 2020 he was in India. Means what is our previous year I said? 1st April 2020 to 31st March 2021. So, April 30 days, May 31 days, June 30 days, July 31 days, August 31 days and September 30 days and October 5 days. So, he stayed more than 182 days, yes or not? Yes, he stayed for 182 days. And what is the other basic condition? He is satisfying first basic condition, yes, because he stayed for 182 days, yes. April, May, June, July, August, September, 6 months, 6 3s are 18 and October 5 days, yes, he stayed more than 182 days. So, he is satisfying the first foremost basic condition. So, whenever he satisfies first basic condition, what do we call? We call them as resident. Now, what actually we have to know? Whether he is satisfying additional conditions or not, let us understand. So, what is the first additional condition? 2 years out of 10 preceding years. But when he came to India for the first time, 18. So, does he is there in India from 10 years? Though he may not be 10 years, but he stayed for 2 years. Yes or not? Why? Because 18 to 19, 19 to 20 and 20 also he stayed more than 182 days. Yes. So, he is satisfying first additional condition. Now, what is our second additional condition? Our second additional condition is 730 days. 730 days out of 7 previous year. Though he did not stay for 7 years, let us check whether he stayed for 730 days or not. 2018 full year he was there, 365 days, yes. And even 2019 to 20 also total 365 days he was there in India, yes or not. So, does he satisfying the second basic condition or additional condition also not. So, what will be his residential status? Resident but ordinary resident, the first one we discussed, where he is satisfying both additional conditions as well as basic condition. You can just look at here. During the previous year 2020, A was in India for 188 days, which is satisfying the first basic condition, and to determine whether he is ordinary resident or not, one has to test the two basic conditions, yes. So, if you look at here, he is satisfying both that also. So, he is resident but ordinary resident, okay. So, now we have discussed everything about the individual perspective. Now, let us move to the Hindu undivided family, because he is also comes under the residential status, because he comes under the definition of person, and he also have the same 3 conditions, that is resident, resident but not ordinary resident, and non-resident. But how it is determined? Why? Because we all know Hindu undivided family means is a family business where head of the person is called Karta, who will look after the business. Then how it is determined? Family will be there somewhere and business will be at some other place. Then how do we determine that? Okay, let's look at that. Here also we have 2 cases, that is resident and ordinary resident, resident but not ordinary resident, and non-resident. So, just look at here residential status of an HUF. Just you can have a glance over this slide. Yes, whenever we are deciding the residential status of an HUF, individual is different, individual will be having some number of days, but HUF will be having how they are managing and controlling their business. If the business is managed and controlled from India, though business is in some other country, okay, but the management and execution and control is from India, it is called resident. Either partially or fully they are considered as resident, okay. If it is not controlled and managed from India, then it is not a resident, he is non-resident. So, just look at here, if management and control situated wholly in India is called resident, wholly outside India is called non-resident. So, Karta is the person who will be, he is called as resident because he is the head of the family and he will look after the business, yes. So, he is the actual person who will look after all those things. So, actually we will see what are actually conditions that are available for the HUFs. Here also we have basic conditions, that is here it is very simple, that is management and control of its affairs or the business is wholly or partly situated and controlled from India, then it is resident, that is the first basic condition. And to fulfill that first basic condition, we have this thing, you can just look at here. If the management and control of an HUF is partly situated outside India, that's the reason I said either fully or partly. So, it may be outside India partly, then also is called as resident. It is not mandatory that wholly should be India, then only it is resident. No, partly is also considered as resident. If the management and control of HUF is wholly situated outside India, then we call it as non-resident. It is very clear and it is very simple to understand. How you are managing your business is foremost thing which will decide whether you are a resident of India or not, okay. Now, additional conditions. Just look at the additional conditions will be same as it is the what were there for the individual, that is 2 years out of 10 previous years and 730 days or more during 7 previous years based on these 2 conditions as we have discussed earlier. Yes, that what is that? Basic condition and 2 additional conditions must be satisfied, then only we call them as resident and ordinary resident. If they are not satisfying, what do we call? Though they are satisfying basic condition, but they are not satisfying both the additional conditions, in that case we call them as resident but not ordinarily resident. and if the business is totally out of India, then we call it as non-resident of India. Next we have firm, other association of persons. So first one we have discussed individuals, the second one HUFs, and the third one is firms. Firms means what? It's nothing but partnership firms or other association of persons, we call it as firms. Residential status of firm may be discussed. How? It's the same, only two things, one is resident and non-resident, and under this we don't have any additional conditions. Okay, we have only resident, same similar like HUFs. What did I say for HUFs? Whether the business is wholly or partly controlled from India, then we call it as resident. If it is not controlled, it's very simple that it is non-resident. Okay. Now the next one is companies, company form of business. How do we determine the company form of business? Okay. So under this, a company may be resident when it is an Indian company. The company should be an Indian one, and it may be foreign company also, but it must and should be controlled and managed or is wholly situated in India. Then also we call them as resident. It is not that because if we say like that, then all MNCs which are working in Hyderabad and high-tech city we call, then all would not exist. Am I right? So it is not mandatory that not only Indian company, but also if they are managed and controlled from India, we call them as Indian companies only. You can just look at here, that is their residential status. Okay. Next we have poem, that is, poem means it's not any poem, it's a place of effective management. How we are managing, it has been amended in 2015. So based on that also we will discuss how the companies have been now coming to India and how they are paying the tax, and this has been implemented from assessment year 2017 and 18. And I hope you all have understood what is residential status. Yes, thank you all.